All right, welcome everyone to this discussion on queering the vote, LGBTQ voter mobilization ahead of the 2020 elections. My name is James Rasiah, and I'm the Democratic Governance Coordinator here at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation at Harvard Kennedy School. Before we begin, the Ash Center would like to acknowledge the land on which Harvard sits as the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people, and a site which has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among nations. You can learn more about the Ash Center's work with Indigenous communities by clicking on the link in the chat box. We'd also like to take this opportunity to remind Harvard community members about the Harvard Votes Challenge. We're now just 1 week out from Election Day, and you can make a voting plan and find important resources by visiting voteschallenge.harvard.edu. With that, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the HKS LGBTQ Caucus and the Institute for Politics. I'd like to thank our panel and everyone in the audience for being here. And with that, I'll hand over to our moderator for today's discussion, Dr. Timothy Patrick McCarthy. Tim, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, James. It's great to be here, and thank to you and your team at the Ash Center for putting this together and for gathering such an illustrious and distinguished group of guests here to talk about queering the vote in the run-up to and in the midst of the 2020 election season. It's my honor to be here today, and I'll be moderating the conversation with these fine folks. Let me just introduce them quickly. First is Chasten Buttigieg, who is a fall 2020 fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Institute of Politics, and is also the recent New York Times best-selling author of a new book called I Have Something to Tell You, which I'm still waiting to be delivered, Chasten. I haven't yet had a chance to dive in, but congratulations on that. Next is Charlotte Clymer, who's a writer and LGBTQ advocate and is here to bring all of that to bear on our conversation. Also, Jade Duran, Secretary of the Maricopa County Democrats, also an engineer, but is based in Arizona, doing amazing work on the ground there. And then Hope Jackson. Hope is the National Deputy Campaign Director for the Human Rights Campaign, also doing amazing work on the ground and in the air, I'm sure, to do all we need to do in this season. I wanted to say that we're going to have a 30+ minute conversation, the five of us. And then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. If you have a question for a particular panelist or for the panel as a whole, please put that in the Q&A space, and I'll be looking at that as we go along, and I'll be able to select some of your questions, not all of them, I'm sure, but some of them when we get to that portion of the program. So let's dive right in, everyone. Welcome. It's great to be here, and thank you for taking time in this very, very busy season. I know everybody here has lots of things they're doing right now, and so we're really grateful for your presence. Let me begin with a question for all of you. From your particular perspective or vantage point, personal, political, professional, how would you describe what's at stake in the 2020 election? What's on the line for LGBTQ plus people? And perhaps maybe address what are the obstacles or challenges to queering the vote? Chasten, let's begin with you, and we'll go in the order that I introduce folks, and then we'll mix it up as we go along.
Oh my gosh. That's a hard one because it feels like it's so much. And sometimes I can't wrap my head around just how much is at stake for the LGBTQI community in this election. I think tonight's going to be really difficult for a lot of people in our community with the potential swearing in of a Supreme Court justice who we all know is very eager to get in there and put all of our rights at stake. This, besides what is going to happen in the Supreme Court, this election is about restoring empathy and leadership to the White House. And we literally have a choice between two very different people, somebody who affirms equality for LGBTQ plus people and somebody who does not believe and surrounds himself with people who do not believe that LGBTQ plus people are equal Americans and that are deserving of equal rights. And so that puts a lot of weight on people's shoulders, their psyches, going about your everyday life in an election season where our country's about to choose between somebody who is going to fight for us and somebody who will not.
Great. Charlotte, how about you? What's at stake here?
Sure. Well, I'll let Hope talk about the broader campaign outlook for LGBTQ people. She's the subject matter expert, and Jade is the only person in this group whose name is on a ballot. So I'll let them talk about that. But from a policy standpoint, this is the most aggressively anti-LGBTQ presidential administration in history. From day one, they have been attacking the rights and livelihoods of LGBTQ people. And we could talk literally for hours about this, but I'll point out a few things. One is that this is the same White House who argued to the Supreme Court that employers should be able to fire LGBTQ people solely for being LGBTQ, not based on their performance or based on other things, but for being LGBTQ. This is the same White House that has banned trans people from serving openly in the military against the advice of literally every credible expert on this issue, including military leadership, budget analysts, and of course, medical professionals. This is the same White House that has pushed forward a regulation that would literally allow medical providers, doctors, nurses, hospital receptionists to turn away LGBTQ people if they feel that treating them goes against their personal beliefs. So I'll say this: the first term of and what I firmly believe will be the only term of this administration was horrible to LGBTQ people. A second term would make that one look like child's play. So it is critically important that we get out the vote and that we defeat these people, because they're coming after LGBTQ people with everything they got.
Right. Thank you, Charlotte. I really appreciate that. And Jade, on the ballot, what do you think is at stake here for us?
I just want to say thank you for having me today, and good morning. Good afternoon to everyone. It's morning over here in Phoenix, so still waking up a little bit. Not on the ballot yet, but maybe one day.
Okay.
I am supporting and representing all of our candidates that are on the ballot here in Maricopa County. And exactly what Chasen and Charlotte said, we have so much on the line in this election for our community, but it's even more than just LGBT rights. We are a community that intersects every other marginalized community in our neighborhoods. We have folks with disabilities, the Black community, everything is on the line for our Black trans family and for our Black brothers and sisters in this community. We have to stand up and fight. It's not just marriage equality, which is going to be on the line now that Amy Coney Barrett is being assigned today, right? She's going to be seated. There's so much on the line in this election. We have to stand up and fight, and we have to make sure that he is only a single term president.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much for that. And Hope, what's at stake and what's on the line?
So if I had to say it in one word, I would say everything. It's definitely on the line, from affordable healthcare to LGBTQ rights, racial justice, immigrant rights, reproductive justice. It is pretty much everything. We're all looking at the SCOTUS decision, what could happen with this nomination. And I think one of the first cases that Amy Coney Barrett would hear is Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, which would be a case that basically says LGBTQ parents could not foster kids. And so that case, I think, when we're talking about religious freedom, will open the door to what could happen for LGBTQ folks. I think about what's in the state legislatures as well. So it's definitely, we're going to see backlash, whether Trump wins or not. I think we can expect that. After marriage equality, we definitely saw a lot of anti-trans cases. I think trans folks have been a target of this administration from the very beginning. And so we can expect that again. And I think some of the problems that we're seeing is voter suppression at the polling locations, number one. We are seeing long lines, and that is going to deter some folks. But I also think the confusion around what's vote by mail, what's absentee ballot, all of those questions come up. It is all the same. Just get your ballot in the mail. And so, yeah, I think there are a lot of issues that may impact this election, but I think ultimately we just have to encourage folks to get out there and vote.
Yeah. So Hope, I wanted to actually, before I pivot to my next big question, although this is also a big question, you mentioned some of the specific challenges, right? Challenges over knowledge, really, about how to do a mail-in ballot and where to put it and how to sign it and all those kinds of things, where polling places are, all the efforts at voter suppression, which we see across the country, but concentrated in particular areas and states of the country. And I'm wondering if any of the others of you want to identify like a particular challenge to queering the vote or to organizing from a get out the vote standpoint, the LGBTQ community. Are there other challenges that you see as being present and in front of us?
So I don't know.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead, Hope.
No, I just wanted to give someone else a chance to speak to it. But I can totally chime in here. I think one of the challenges that we're seeing the most, this is our first time organizing in a pandemic.
Right.
And so we're doing everything virtually. We're doing it through text. We're doing it, HRC is doing it through our team app, where it's all about relational organizing, making sure you talk to the folks you know. But I think the challenge is that folks definitely know what's at stake, but it's also very much so this relaxed, like surely people are going to go out and vote. I think we've seen this in other years where we also thought people would go out and vote. And so it's important that we're having those conversations with our family and friends, and we're talking about, hey, do you have a plan to vote? Are you going to mail your ballot? Are you going to drop it off at a location, and making sure that they have the tools that they need? So I think that is a challenge, and just making sure we're having those conversations and not leaving it to chance this year.
Right, good. Charlotte, Chasten, Jade, any other additional challenges that you see specifically related to getting out the vote in the LGBTQ community?
Well, I want to say that LGBTQ people do show up. Like the LGBTQ vote is something that consistently shows up in election after election. We need all of our Assistance Street allies to also show up. They need to be making sure they have a plan to vote. Go to iwillvote.com, call your friends and family, make sure they have a plan to vote. The burden for LGBTQ equality can't be on LGBTQ people. It has to be on everyone. And that's every issue tangential to LGBTQ equality. That's racial equality, reproductive justice, immigration reform. All of these, really come down to allyship and making sure that we're doing the labor of getting out there and casting a ballot.
Okay, good.
I'm really glad Charlotte brought up allyship because, I was knocking doors just this last week in Michigan. And meeting people at the door who said they weren't sure if they were going to vote, how to vote, or who they were going to vote for. And I stand in a position of privilege as an open person who feels free enough to say, well, I am gay and this is what's at stake for me in this election. But we're also talking about building a country where more people feel empowered to say that, because we haven't yet built a country where everyone just gets to live an open and authentic life. And so this is really about allyship as well, because not every person just gets to speak up or text their family or their friends or their neighbor and say, hey, by the way, I'm queer and here's what's at stake for me in this election. So if you also care about all of the communities that Charlotte just mentioned, then it's also on you as an ally to speak up for those communities and to remind people that their rights are at stake as well.
Right. And Jade?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really challenging doing outreach and organizing in this pandemic. It's amazing that we've shifted so quickly and have been able to go virtual. But in the past, we would always have fun events at our local bars and clubs and get to hang out together and really have that FaceTime and one-to-one interaction to really get the vote out, or have candidates come and speak and educate our community. So it's been really challenging during this pandemic to find safe ways to do that and still make sure everyone has the resources they need to vote. But I'm so proud of our teams. We've moved digital. We're having digital events where we're still having like happy hours on Zoom, or we're having drag shows on Zoom, and we're able to use that as educational ways to turn out the vote too. So it's been really great to see that pivot and shift.
Right. The next question I have for all of you is a question about the relationship between what I call inside politics and outside politics, right? Electoral politics in many ways is playing the inside game, trying to get people to run, get people to campaign well, get people to win office, getting people out to vote, et cetera, all crucial, but it happens within the structures and institutions of our electoral political system. And yet there's also outside politics, right? Which is the work that LGBTQ people and many, many marginalized groups of people have had to do from the very inception, if not before our movements even began. And most of the work that our movement has done has been outside of the formal institutions of political power by definition, because we've been excluded from that until very, very recently. And so I'm wondering if you all could talk a little bit about that relationship, and in particular, how we as a community and movement build more equitable, intersectional, and sustainable coalitions, both in the realm of electoral politics in this moment, and some of you have already spoken to that, but also for the future of the movement moving forward, because we're not going to all pack up once we figure out who wins this election by any means. In this time of national reckoning, how do we do that work to win at the ballot box and continue to work for liberation? Maybe, Jade, I'll start with you.
We run for office. That's how we continue to sustain. If you are interested in politics, which In our community, you cannot ignore politics. Everything about our day-to-day is heavily influenced, and even just going to work is a political action. So if you are invested, which you should be, step up and run for office. We need to continue to build a bench of experienced candidates who are going to bring new experiences and new identities to the table. That is the way that we can sustainably keep politics moving in the right direction and making sure that we have equity for our community. It's also supporting candidates. So if you don't want to run for office, there's a candidate who needs your help, or there's LGBT candidates that you can support, or there's allies that you can help educate. There's a role for everybody, and you have a unique skill that you can bring to the table.
Right. Hope, how would you add to that sort of relationship between inside and outside politics?
Yeah, I think if we're going to win at the ballot box, if we're going to win in this movement, I think it cannot be a single issue movement at all. We have to make sure that it's not just LGBTQ rights. Equality voters think more beyond LGBTQ rights. We're talking about reproductive justice. We're talking about what's happening in this country right now as it relates to racial justice. And so we have to make sure if our liberation movement is nothing else, it's united. And that's going to be super important, that we bring everyone to the forefront, and we're making sure that everyone's issues are being slated as on that ballot when we go and vote on November 3rd. And so when we're talking to folks, we're not just talking about equality issues, we're talking about things that are going to impact their everyday lives. Whether or not you can go out and be free, or you can go out and tell your story or talk to your friends in your neighborhood without being attacked. I think those things are conversations that folks are having, and we have to make sure that they know that those are the things on the ballot, and we're going to talk about those things, and we're united around their issues as well. And so it cannot be a single issue movement.
Yeah. Hope, could you just give, for those in the audience who don't know what an equality voter is,
Sure.
can you define that and explain the work that HRC has been doing and other organizations have been doing to both define what that means and also increase the ranks of who they are?
Yes. So HRC has a data model that we did with Catalyst, where we looked at how folks voted in previous elections. And so we took a look at their voting record to see how they voted on issues. And what we found is there are 57 million equality voters across this country, folks that typically vote for pro-equality candidates. They vote on pro-equality issues. And so we wanted to make sure that those are the folks we're having conversations with, those low to mid propensity voters, folks that need an additional push. We know that they identify the issues, they know these issues are important, and we want to make sure that we're having those conversations with those folks. So 57 million equality voters, yes, that we're talking to across this country in key battleground states that are going to be super important to winning this election up and down the ballot.
Mm-hmm. Great. Charlotte and then Chasten.
Hope and Jade make great points there. I would say it's really critically important to recognize the work of on-the-ground activists who have been pushing policymakers to do this actual work. One of the best examples recently is Monica Roberts. She recently passed away, but for years she was doing the work of educating the broader public about the violence toward trans and non-binary people. At least 33 trans and non-binary people have been killed in 2020, which is the most ever. It is the deadliest year on record for trans and non-binary people, the vast majority of them Black and Latinx women. We saw presidential candidates over the past year on the debate stage citing statistics that she had been pushing for years before anyone outside of the LGBTQ community cared about this. So it's the work of ground activists that really push the ball forward and make sure that elected officials are doing the work of putting that into policy. They need more resources, they need more recognition. And so what I would really hope for a new Democratic Congress and a Biden White House is they really center the labor and the efforts of LGBTQ activists who have been doing this work for years tirelessly and haven't gotten much credit for it.
Yeah. And Chasten, before I come to you, just a point on that, Charlotte, that I think is really important that I teach here in my course called Queer Nation, which is a course on LGBTQ protest, politics, and policy at the Kennedy School. And one of the things we talk about all the time is, beware the electeds who finally come around to your issue and then take credit for advancing the rights, right, that people have been organizing for forever, right? It's only been a very, very, very recent phenomenon, right? I mean, Pete Buttigieg's presidential candidacy is a very recent phenomenon. And we think about the ways in which our community and movement and even then only some within the movement and the community are being invited in to that kind of inside politics to have an influence, to give our perspectives, to and then be given credit for the work that has come long before the kind of telescoped recent advances have been taking place. But I'm struck by, I'm a historian, so I study change over time, and there has been a change over time, particularly recently, and yet there's still so much more work to do.
And do you mind if I put that real quick too, that it's especially important for elected officials and those who support them to understand that there's a difference between the legal battle and the cultural battle.
Right.
You know, there's a big difference between pushing for legal rights, which is great and should be centered, but you also need to be talking about LGBTQ issues out front in public and setting an example of what it means to be inclusive and affirmative, and making sure that LGBTQ people are part of the public square. Because quite frankly, there were some presidential candidates during the primary who did shy away from LGBTQ issues often, even though they supported them on paper, and we have to stop that. The cultural battle is just as important as the legal battle.
Yeah, speaking of the cultural battle and setting an example, Chasten, I know you've spoken so, I have found so powerfully and movingly about those cultural issues and the ways of representation in the cultural realm that Charlotte's talking about, which is absolutely crucial in addition to the legal and legislative battles. What would you say about these things?
I'm really glad. I'm like snapping over here to everything that everyone has said. And what Charlotte said about the difference between the cultural and the legal battle is, I've been thinking about what she mentioned. During the Democratic primary process, we very rarely talked about LGBTQ issues, but we did have, a specific town hall on LGBTQ issues, which is historic and important. But then we just had multiple town halls and presidential debates where the issue never came up once. I think it is fair to say that only certain people in our acronym have seen themselves represented at every level of government or in the media. And we have to remember that we are a very big acronym. And it is so important that every single person sees themselves reflected not only in politics and people running for office, but also in the media and on television and in the issues in which candidates are talking about. Like, LGBTQ issues are not just marriage, there are so many other issues related to justice that also affect LGBTQ people, and it shouldn't be on the candidate to wait for someone to ask about LGBTQ issues. It is always at the forefront, and if the idea of inclusion only finds LGBTQ people in discussion when it comes to like the idea of marriage, then you are erasing an entire community and also a large portion of people in that community who are often historically left out of those conversations. But the culture does shift when we put it at the forefront. Why don't we see queer people on television invited to Sunday shows and on CNN repeatedly or whatever, outside of election season? Election season comes around and they're like, oh, I guess we have to talk about queer people now because that matters to Democrats. We invite some queer people on, and then the election's over, and like, where did the queer people go? We don't disappear. We are all still here, and our lives are still being affected, by the people in which we were just talking about, electing. And so that representation matters a lot, not just during election season, but all the time. Yeah. I can sense the soapbox coming under my feet, so I'm going to mute my
That's all right. That's all right. I'm sure all of us have a soapbox nearby, given the work that we all do in the world. So be it. Embrace the soapbox. I wanted to ask one more big question before we move to the Q&A. And again, I'll say to folks in the audience, if you have a question for one or all of the panelists, please put it in the Q&A. I see a couple have populated already, and we'll get to those questions after we go through one more round here. One of the other things that I talk a lot with my students and out in the world, and we all know this, is this thing that I call the paradox of progress, right? These moments in our history where clear advances in rights and equality and freedom are manifest and are achieved in that way. And yet at the same time, simultaneously often, sometimes even before those advances even come to full fruition, there is a vicious and sometimes even violent backlash. Charlotte, you mentioned the murder rates for trans women of color in this year, and so many other of the ways in which violences are done to marginalized communities of people, whether it's LGBTQ plus folks or any other group of people who exists historically and politically on the downside of discrimination, right? That this backlash is always ready to go. Right, those forces of reaction meet those forces of progress, which is why we often live in such contested and contentious times. And I'm wondering, when we think about that kind of simultaneous progress and backlash, right, what are the best tools that we have available to us to fight that? Right? What are the best, specifically, the best some tools that we have available to us to fight that backlash and to ensure that progress? And then maybe if you wanted to speak to what you think a policy priority or some kind of tactical or strategic priority might be in this moment to facilitate that work. Hope, why don't I start with you?
Sure. So I think one of the best tools we have is folks that are already on the ground doing the work and then coming together in a united front. I think we're going to have to be extremely strategic, no matter who wins this election. If we're going to be on the offense or whether we're on the defense, we have to come together and make sure that the agenda we have set forth for the LGBTQ community is one that is strategic and united. We also have to make sure that those intersectional issues that are right now at play are a part of that agenda as well. And so I think as we think through what's going to happen after November 3rd, because that's just a mile marker at this point, it's not the end all be all. We still have an extremely big fight following the election. And so I think the first fight will be with SCOTUS and what we're going to see with the Supreme Court and the cases that are coming up. I think a secondary fight is going to be in our state legislatures, because that's obviously going to determine what the agenda for each state leg is. And I think anti-trans legislation is going to be a big part of that. Communities, every marginalized community is under attack. And so I think we're going to have quite a bit on our hands, but being strategic about how we galvanize together and make sure that our plans moving forward are one where we're going to be on a united front. Our liberation movement is no different from what's happening in other countries. As we see right now in Nigeria, things that are happening, police brutality. I think the same thing is happening over here in this country. And so the same way folks are organizing and coming together, we're going to have to do that post-election, because as I said, it's a mile marker. We have quite a way to go in our liberation movement.
All right. I love that, the mile marker of the liberation movement. That's great. I love the way you phrased that. Thank you. Charlotte, why don't we go to you next?
Yeah, well, I think we have the data, right? We are overcome with data that supports our positions here. Last year, Reuters did a poll and they asked two questions that stood out most. The first question they asked was, how many, or do you support federal non-discrimination protections? And something like 75% of Americans, voters who responded, said yes, they do support them. The second question they ask is, do federal non-discrimination protections exist at the federal level? And half of respondents said they did. They don't. Beyond marriage, there are no federal non-discrimination protections. In the vast majority of the United States, LGBTQ people still face discrimination in housing, in credit, in jury service, in public accommodations, in adoption agencies, so many different areas of public life. Marriage was a very important but small part of the overall movement. And we have data to back up the fact that, Americans saw marriage and they extrapolated that to believe that LGBTQ rights overall was over. So what we really need right now are policymakers, especially at the federal level, to take those statistics and to educate the American public about what's next for LGBTQ people. The biggest thing is the Equality Act. The Equality Act is one of the most popular pieces of legislation in modern history. 70% of Americans support it. It got a strong bipartisan passage vote in the House. And the only reason it's not law right now is because Mitch McConnell knew it would pass in the Senate, and he refused to bring it to the floor for a vote. So I promise you, once Biden and Harris get into office, knock on wood, once we have a Democratic Congress, knock on wood, they're going to push for this piece of legislation to get passed. And the reason we're going to be able to, make that case to the American public is by citing the data that we have. So use the data. The data is a gift.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Yeah, and it's worth emphasizing the Equality Act has been passed in the House by a very, very strong bipartisan margin. And the only thing standing in its way is Mitch McConnell, not even a Republican-controlled Senate, because they might actually have the votes if it was brought to the floor.
They do. The Senate has the votes right now.
Right. So this is a day one thing for Biden-Harris, right? This is what they talk about, day one, not first 100 days, but literally day one. It could happen, and the shift in the Senate in power to Democrats would be the thing for the Equality Act. Good. Chasten, I'm going to come to you, and then Jade, and then we'll open it up for the Q&A.
Yeah, and for the sake of time, I'll try to be short. And Charlotte's right, we have the data there, but marriage didn't solve everything for this community. Mm-hmm. And there was a young woman I met on the campaign trail who had recently aged out of the foster care system, young Black trans woman, mm-hmm. Who was living in a small rural town, who was struggling to find housing because nobody wanted to rent to her, who was struggling to find employment, and the place where she did find employment required her to dress as the gender that she was assigned at birth, sex that she was assigned at birth. And so marriage didn't make any of that go away for her. That didn't solve discrimination, the discrimination that she faces every single day, that people can deny her housing, they can deny her employment, and make her life a hell of a lot harder than it needs to be. And so marriage equality didn't somehow miraculously make life great and easy for all LGBTQ plus people. And that is why the Equality Act is so important. And I think it's why we make politics so personal, that it's not just about the data, but it's about how that data in turn affects our everyday lives. When we're meeting that voter at the door saying, referencing the data that Charlotte was referencing, did you know that there is no federal law protecting LGBTQ people from being fired, from being denied housing? And for example, I share that story a lot. Here's this young woman I met, and that is her American reality. She lives in that America, and she deserves a better America. And therefore, that's why I'm urging you to vote for this person who believes in the Equality Act. And so the toolkit that I think we need to use, which often in politics, we are told not to make things personal, right? And somehow it makes us weaker as politicians to open up and be vulnerable and talk about the ways in which things affect our everyday lives. I think we have to make it extremely personal, especially in this election. Oh, yeah. That at the end of the day, politics is about making people's lives better and not worse. Yeah. And this is how the Equality Act could make people just like that young woman's lives a hell of a lot better.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm a big personal political is personal person myself. Good. Jade, why don't you weigh in here, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on something that Hope said about our state legislatures. That's really critical, especially here in Arizona and what we've seen. So we're on the brink of history here in Maricopa County in Arizona. We can flip our house and have a blue house for the first time in a very, very long time. And all of that is on the line. So before the pandemic hit, our state legislature had put forth a bill. The Republicans had put forth a bill stating that students in school could only participate in sports of their gender, their sex assigned at birth. And so the only reason that didn't pass was because the pandemic hit and our House wasn't able to meet and really get anything through the legislation. And so we need to focus on local races too. So yes, the presidency is a massive race that we need to make sure we win, but we also have to start at the bottom of the ballot. So if you still have your ballot sitting at home, start at the bottom, save that presidency vote for last, and do your research. Make sure you're voting on all of the propositions, all the amendments that you have. Pay attention to your school board races. Those are technically nonpartisan races, but who we elect to our school boards dictates what our students learn in school and when schools reopen during a pandemic. These are super critical seats. And so if we want equity for our community and all communities, it starts at the bottom of the ballot.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I was hoping, Jay, that you would say that. I'm so glad you said that, starting at the bottom and then moving on up. I've been working on an initiative here around LGBTQ and inclusive curriculum in the schools. And time and again, when you talk to teachers, you talk to students, you talk to parents, right? They're saying that the obstacles are often at the local level in these local jurisdictions where it matters who's on the school board, it matters who the elected officials are in your particular local and state jurisdiction. So it's absolutely vital to do that. So thank you for that. I wanted to open it up to the Q&A. We have some really great questions. The first question, and not all of you have to weigh in on all of these. If you want, you can, but if one or two of you wants to take it up, it'd be great. There's a question here from Tova Wang that says, how much of a barrier are voter ID laws, especially for the trans community? Anyone?
I can speak to Arizona. So our voter ID laws, so you have to take one form of ID if it's a government or state issued ID. And we do not have protection for our trans community in Arizona. So oftentimes the driver's license doesn't match what you have on paper. And so that's a really big struggle that we have here. So it's really critical for our poll observers and our poll workers to make sure that they're educated and practicing equity, and that we have someone there that's making sure that person is able to vote and they aren't wrongfully turned away because of these ancient laws that aren't in place that aren't open to our trans community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Okay.
I don't want to take up too much space, but
go ahead.
I just want to, point out that, I mean, this is what happens when you have a patchwork of protections in the United States, especially for voter ID laws. When I came out, I had to go to about 6 or 7 different agencies to get my name changed on various government documents. In many states, that's not accessible for trans non-binary people. And so they'll go to the voting booth, and if someone has a different record, they just don't get to vote. And especially if the poll worker is a transphobic person and they're working in bad faith, they might just look for any reason at all to turn away a trans or non-binary person, and that does happen. And so what we really need is a comprehensive, universal voter ID protection for trans and non-binary people,
Mm-hmm.
and also to make voting more accessible and to not, hamstring people with these arcane and ridiculously complex ID laws to begin with.
Right. Excellent. I wanted to turn to another issue of policy. And again, so much of what we're talking about is contingent upon who wins the election. Right? I mean, the conversation we're having is very different if it's a Trump re-election as opposed to a Biden-Harris election. And we all know that. And there's a question here about what would happen if Biden and Harris won. And so Ronnie Maestas Condas asks, can each of you speak to how, or any of you speak to how you would deal with the court packing in a new Biden-Harris administration? We all understand the SCOTUS and the future of SCOTUS is on the table here, and so many of the rights for so many different communities, so many of these advances are really on the chopping block if that doesn't happen. So how do you speak to that, right? That's been a fairly contentious piece of this presidential season. Anyone want to weigh in on that?
I think this is an issue that and there's a lot of nuance, and I am not like a scholar in this area, but this seems to be one of those issues where it's like the shiny ball for people on Facebook and Twitter, like, well, look over here. Here's something to pay attention to that will distract you from our president not taking, hold of his leadership position to save hundreds of thousands of Americans dying from a global pandemic. Let's not forget that the Republicans changed the number of Supreme Court justices on the bench when they denied Merrick Garland a hearing. So they changed the number of justices to 8 until it was advantageous for them to change it back to 9. And now I think many conservatives want to pretend that Joe Biden's going to get into office and he's going to put 400 liberal, Supreme Court justices on the bench. I think many Democrats want to make the Supreme Court a non-political institution again, so that every time there is an opening on the Supreme Court, it is not this like it's raining hellfire all the time because we're trying to figure out how to put a person on that bench appropriately, and it has become so politicized. And so I think what Biden and many Democrats are talking about is depoliticizing the Supreme Court. But if you're having that argument, like I think many people are having with their uncle on Facebook, just remind them that conservatives loved packing the court or changing the number of people on the Supreme Court until they decided they were going to change it again. like Charlotte says, hit them with the data.
Yeah, right, exactly. Anybody else want to weigh in on the court packing potential?
I want to, but I want to get Hope and Jade a chance to talk because I've talked a lot. So I'll back up.
Hope and Jade, either of you?
I would just add just the single fact that Trump has nominated over a quarter of the federal judges. And so I think, that being the thing that people often say, they're going to pack the courts. Well, the courts have already been packed. That's right. At this point. And so, yeah, that's all I wanted to add there, Charlotte.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to.
Wait.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Let's put a few more things real quick because I want to make sure people have these talking points.
Sure.
When back in the campaign, it wasn't just as Justin pointed out that they kept the Supreme Court at 8 for the majority of 2016. It was also that many Republicans openly pledged near the end of the campaign that if Hillary Clinton was elected, they would block all future SCOTUS nominations, regardless of qualification. These are the same people who ignore that the Supreme Court has been changed 8 times in our history because that is set by Congress, not by the Constitution. We have changed the composition of the court 8 times. Now, it has been at its current rate for quite a while, but the fact is, back when we set the number of seats for SCOTUS, it was to align with the number of circuit courts, one Supreme Court justice for every circuit court. We have 13. We currently have 9 justices. So, and then finally, I think Biden had a great approach to this. He just announced a commission for a 6-month study with a bipartisan group of people who will come together and analyze how to reform and fix the judiciary to make sure that everyone feels included in the process and that one political party isn't able to just cram through all their nominees by disregarding norms and pushing their policies on the American people.
Great. Thank you for those talking points. Always very, very helpful. Speaking of talking points, there's a question about how LGBTQ folks talk to their, this is from Nicole Lockney, how we talk to conservative friends and family members. And I think that this is a broader question about how we share our lives or not, and when we make those decisions in terms of the power of personal storytelling to perhaps open up greater, if not tolerance, then acceptance. But there's also a particular fever pitch right now, right, Chasten? You mentioned fighting with your uncle on social media. During an election season, right, making a case about the personal stakes for you to people who may not understand that or may not see that, either willfully or unwittingly. So I'm wondering if each of you could just offer a little bit of advice about how we might have those conversations within this political season and beyond it. And I don't know a queer person who has not had to have at least one of these conversations over the course of like the last 24 hours. Hope you.
It is a big part of just organizing work that you be able to share your personal story. No one can argue with you about your personal story. It is your story to tell. And I think it's super important that when you're talking to family and friends or even strangers, if you're phone banking or text banking, that you do share those parts of your life, how this presidency or how the election of whatever candidate is going to impact your life. I think that's ultimately important. It's hard. It's a courageous conversation that you're having with someone that does not support you 100%. But I think it's an important conversation that we have to have when we're talking about these issues that are coming up. And so I often have to tell my own story. And for some folks, they're like, but you seem very calm, comfortable in who you are. That wasn't always the case. I've told this story 1,000 plus times now to where I'm comfortable telling it to you because you're a family member or you're a friend. But it's important that I tell it with authenticity and that you're able to hear me and that I hear your points too, because you have your own story. And there's a reason why you feel so strongly against what I'm saying. And so the hope is that through that conversation, and we can further get to the point where we're talking heart to heart here. And I'm saying to you, hey, this is going to impact my life. How you vote is going to determine what happens to me and to my children. And so having that conversation is very important, but it's all about that personal story. I think that's the only way to kind of get to those heartstrings of a person for them to understand what's really happening in your world, because they don't know until you tell them.
Right.
Yeah, and I am not opposed to guilt tripping family members. I think in 2016, I did the thing where I was like, well, I tried to talk to my dad, it didn't work, but it's okay because we thought we had it in the bag, right? And so this year, not taking any chances, I've been hounding my father left and right. I have been guilting him and have told him, if you love me, you will vote for Biden. And if you don't, then what you just said is a complete lie. And I need proof that you did vote for the right people this time. And it's holding those people accountable and not being afraid to stand up for yourself. Like, my father is a very privileged person who will be fine regardless of the outcome of the election, but I won't, and his future grandchildren won't. And so ensuring that he realizes that influences the way that he votes and will hopefully expand to the rest of his family is really what I've been trying to do and have those difficult conversations. And also, if you can talk to your family members, which is often the hardest conversations you can have, then you can easily pick up a phone, just like Hope said, and start phone banking people you don't know and sharing that same story.
Yeah, that's great. Good. Justin, Charlotte.
I love that, Jade. I love everything you said. You know, I see some folks in the comments talking about, you know, how we're persuading conservatives. You know, I believe, and on the campaign trail, I believe that I wasn't going to go out there and hit people over the head. Like, you know, if you don't vote for LGBTQ causes, you're a terrible, horrible person. I believed in making the case by making it personal. And I gave them space to see how important that is, because I feel like if you're just pointing fingers and saying like you're a homophobic, transphobic, terrible bigot, you're just going to push them back into the arms of people like Donald Trump. But if we make space for those conversations and we root it in our humanity, it allows other people to connect with us on very personal issues. You know, I talk about, like, Pete and I are trying to start a family right now. It is an exhausting process trying to figure out where and how we can start a family. And I think, you know, a lot of conservatives really value family. And I have used the example of calling an adoption agency here in Indiana and being told they don't do gay adoptions and having them hang up on me on the other end of the call, when there are, you know, thousands of children in this country who need a loving home. Don't you want me to have that right to adopt that child? You know, when my husband is in a car accident, hypothetically, and rushed to the hospital, don't you want me to have the right to rush to that hospital and sit at his bedside and hold his hand? You know, people historically have been denied that right in this country. This is why we fight for these things, these deeply personal, powerful, painful things that happen to us in our life. Those are the conversations that we have with other people. It's not just, you know, are you a bigot or are you not? It's really, do you support the things in my life that you enjoy? And I would ask people to make a list of everything that they stand to gain and compare it to your list of everything that you stand to lose when we make these decisions.
Yeah, that's great. Charlotte?
Yeah, really quickly, those are amazing answers. I think Hope was especially potent in talking about how it's an uncomfortable conversation. And I would say that's even more reason to flip the script here. I want to ask, you know, how often are straight and cisgender people having these conversations with their family members about LGBTQ rights?
Right.
You know, how often are they making the case to them about the importance of the Equality Act? How often are they asking them, do you know that LGBTQ people don't have federal non-discrimination protections? As white people, how often are we having conversations about Black Lives Matter with our friends and family over the Thanksgiving table? You know, how often are able-bodied people talking about folks with disabilities who are left out of healthcare plans because of pre-existing conditions? You know, so much of this labor should fall on allies. You know, as allies, in whatever capacity we are allies, it's incumbent upon us to take on this labor so that those people in marginalized communities don't have to have those uncomfortable conversations and debate their own humanity. So I would ask any straight or cis people who are listening to this right now, especially those who are white, make sure you call your friends and family and talk to them about these issues and ask them, why are you supporting this person who clearly said that employers should be able to fire people solely for being LGBTQ? If you can do that and just plant that seed in their brain, I think it'll go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask another question, which is about another set of conversations or advocacy points, which is, and it's combining two questions in the Q&A, which is what do we do, or what responsibility do we have to members of our community that are so terrified in this moment for very good and justified reasons that they are in some ways, frozen in terms of what they can or cannot do in this election season, or politically more broadly. And then how do we talk to people who feel like they're alienated from this system? Either they're frozen because of the terror of it all, or they feel like it's not worth it because they either are not allowed in, like with young people who can't vote because they're not of age, right? Or other people who feel like the system has failed them and is never going to rise to them. How do we have that conversation? What do we do in those instances to call people in or draw people into this work?
You asked a very good question. That was a tough one. I think the one thing that we can do to draw people in is just look back at our history, and like Charlotte keeps saying, look at the data. We can't afford to sit out. We have to take up our brave space and go out there and fight. We have to get involved. We have to bring friends with us. I think our community is really good at finding our chosen family. A lot of us who weren't necessarily accepted into our families, we have an amazing support network of our chosen friends and our chosen family. Leverage them as support, make a plan, go out together, make sure that you're safe, that you're working for safe candidates and allies, and there is a space for you, there's a role for you, and you are welcome, and we need you now more than ever.
Good. Justin?
I met a lot of young people, a lot of young queer people on the campaign trail. And the thing that hurt the most was the thought that we could win and it still wouldn't make everything better right away. These young queer people who would like hold me trembling, terrified of the country that they lived in. And many of those fears, you wish you could just make them go away. And simply by electing Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, that won't make everything better right away for many people. We have this tendency to make the presidency seem like it's the only office that matters, like it's the biggest show in politics. But in your backyard, there are queer people who are hurting or confused or scared, who are not yet ready to come out, who don't know where they belong, who don't know if it is safe enough to go into the library. And that is why advocating in our own backyards, making sure that we let queer people know where their safe spaces are. We affirm their identity and their welcomeness into a community. And also Twittervism is a very small form of activism, and it cannot be your only form of activism. There are so many organizations around this country that need your help. And right in your own backyard, your local LGBTQ center, supporting a school board candidate who will actually affirm LGBTQ students and fight for their rights, your community center, places who are housing LGBTQ youth or folks who have been pushed out of housing. I mean, so many people need your help and your activism, and it's not just about electing Joe Biden. Joe Biden doesn't get to walk into the West Wing and wave a magic wand and make everything better for queer people. It's also on us to make sure that our communities are places where people feel empowered to exist. I will be honest, I live in Indiana, and there are still places in this state where I do not feel comfortable holding my husband's hand.
Yeah.
And I also, sit in a position of immense privilege.
Yeah.
And imagine what young people feel like in this country. And that is why it's so important that not only do we elect people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but we do the work right here in our own backyard. Because again, all politics is personal. And what's more personal than walking out your front door and not being sure if you are allowed to exist in that space?
Yeah.
So you got to do the work in your hometown too.
Justin, I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I also don't feel comfortable holding my husband's hand when we walk down the street here. It's not just Indiana. Hope, Charlotte, would you like to add to that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
Go ahead, Hope.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation of hope that when we're talking to young folks or folks that are just afraid of what this election means and it not being the end of it, I think it's absolutely right. We have to continue to bring those young folks into the conversations. We have some amazing young leaders in this country that are organizing in much different ways that my age group is, and it's phenomenal. And so I think they have to be a part of our movement. We have to involve them in the conversation, but we also have to recognize that, as Jade and Chasten said, it's not just about the presidency. It's those down ballot folks that are closer to our lives that we can touch. It's not just the Equality Act. It has to be at every state legislature that we're doing the work, and as well as local laws as well. And so we have to be having those conversations. And for folks that are not feeling like this election is one that they can count on, I think looking to find folks that are connected, that are united, and making sure that they're organizing to be a part of those groups, be a part of the work that's happening, because I think just seeing their stories of hope gives us courage to keep going and keep fighting. There are so many amazing young folks. And so I look to them in doing the work to figure out what are the ways that I can organize differently. And so, yeah, I say grab onto a young person, because they're definitely moving us ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Hope. I appreciate that. Charlotte.
Really quickly, if you're listening on this call, I want you to do something when you leave this panel. I want you to do a quick Google search on local and state orgs that are run by queer people of color and trans people of color. And I want you to donate to them. I'm a proud alum of the Human Rights Campaign, and I'm sure Hope is glad to work there too. But it's our local and state orgs, and specifically those led by queer people of color, and especially trans people of color, that need the most help right now, especially in the pandemic. So if you have $5, just go to a local org that's led by trans person of color, trans folks of color, and make sure that you are supporting their efforts, because they are the ones who need the most help right now.
Yeah, no, I want to co-sign completely on that suggestion. And Charlotte, you just opened up what is going to be my sort of lightning round last question. So if you have another thing to add to this, great. And I'm going to come back to you last. But my last question in this moment, we got a week to election day. We're already in the middle of the election. Of course, we have 1 week to go to election day, 1 week and a day. Merciful mother. And we have lots of work to do. So what is your one fierce and urgent action item that you want to share with the audience here? We have 30 seconds for each of you. Chasten, you first.
No, when you put the word fierce, then I feel pressured. Is it going to be fierce enough?
Get on the soapbox.
Better vote. You better vote. And I love what Charlotte said. Put your money where your mouth is. It is not just enough to say, I am an ally. I support the LGBTQ community. Who are you paying? Who are you writing the check to? Who are you supporting? And who are you encouraging to keep doing that work? So yes, please go punch that hole for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Drop that ballot off, whatever. Write a check, because we are just getting started. November 3rd is not the finish line.
It's the mile marker in a long, long, long race. Exactly. Jade.
All right.
Here's an urgent action item.
If you haven't voted, what are you waiting for? Get your ballot done now. So number 1, vote. Number 2, volunteer. Number 3, donate. And number 4, get ready and find out what seat you're running for next election.
Oh, I love it. Yes. Okay. Hope.
I'm going to echo all of that. If you have not voted and you need help understanding how to do so, go to hrc.org/vote. If and when you finish voting, it is time to put on your boots and sit at your desk to do some virtual phone banking, some text banking, whatever you're doing, we have a role for you. So there's no reason why you should not be getting involved. If you need to get involved and if you don't know where to go, visit mobilize.us/HRC. Sign up to volunteer with us. We got text banks, phone banks, we got Zoom meetings, all of the things happening. So please join us in action.
Great. And Charlotte, do you have anything else you want to add?
Really quickly, don't assume that your progressive friends are going to vote. Don't assume that they voted already. Make sure you make a list of all your progressive friends and family. Make sure they vote. I'm calling Chasten this week, and I'm going to ask him if he voted already and why the hell he hasn't yet.
I'm going right after this call, Charlotte. I'm so
okay. Well, I'm texting you later to make sure you did.
Right.
Everyone use the URL iwillvote.com. iwillvote.com. Takes less than 60 seconds to check your registration and make a plan to vote.
Great, great. Thank you all. My gosh, what timing we have. It's amazing. I just want to say thank you to the Ash Center. Thank you to the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School. Thank you to the LGBTQ Caucus. Thank you, Jade. Thank you, Chasten. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Hope. Chosen family. I want to just say how grateful I personally am for your voices and your visions and your work in the world and just your wondrous presence, not just here today, but in the world more broadly. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm just going to add my fierce and urgent thing. Our time is done here. Now go get back to work. Thanks everybody for joining us.